Some chat questions on these topics as well. So, Crucible interaction with mirrored and corrupted items. Can you do anything with those, or are they locked out?
Okay, so there's some fun stuff you can do in the higher tier version of the in-game map, the one that's really hard to get. And an example here, we don't want to spoil too much, but an example, I believe, is that there is a mod which enables you to use... Is it a mod or a basic property?
A mod on the map item.
Right, a mod on the map item that enables you to interact with corrupted items, for example. And so there are exceptions that you can bypass. I still believe you cannot do anything with mirrored items, right?
No, but if you mirror an item, that copies the tree.
Yeah, so mirroring an item does copy the tree, but once you've got the item mirrored, it's unmodifiable.
Okay, will you, this is a question I think for Ruthless. Will you be able to imprint crucible trees?
Yes, I don't see why not.
Alright, cool. Will Dancing Dervish benefit from the passive tree while the item is disabled? This is kind of feeds into questions like about energy blades and things like that as well, where you've got weird contextual changes in how a weapon is used and classified.
We certainly had bugs related to putting energy blades in the Crucible. That was a fun time.
Always. Always.
Energy blades doesn't work.
We'll have to look into it. I mean, I'm certain the QA team have gone through everything and fixed it all, but that wasn't percolated up to me. But we'll make sure the sensible outcome applies.
Talking now about trade a bit, how will trading items with Crucible trees work? Will you be able to search for nodes on the trade site?
We are trying to get that functionality, but it's worth noting the way that this works is the trade site is put together by one of our staff members who's very busy, and he only gets the copy of the league to go and do the trade site stuff like yesterday kind of situation. So he has a week to get Crucible support working, and so we're working on it. It's difficult in this case. We normally can easily within a week sort out any itemization stuff that came from a league, and in this case it's quite complicated as you can imagine. So we have no promises there, but yeah, of course we wanted to work on the trade side. And it's worth noting we do have an API, so if the public want to take the API and implement it better than us or faster than us, they're welcome to do so. But in the meantime, yeah, we'll try to get it up, and we want it so that people can easily identify certain nodes and trade for the items. And my expectation is that it will probably be straightforward to find items with a specific node, but
1、2、3，对，没有保留，没有多一，应该是多一只而已。然后那个触发技能
，doing complicated searches involving combinations of nodes and other stuff, will certainly not be possible initially. And so
我现在在想那个东西。
I think that the worst case scenario is players are going to be able to find a bunch of items with a node that they're looking for, and then manually examine them to work out which one they actually want to trade for. And that's not a terrible compromise. In fact, personally, how I prefer it to work so the trade is a bit sticky.
如果2次击中的话，它只有35%less damage， 所以会差不多有65%的末伤，会重复击中。他刚有说可以吗？这样超强，只要你的冷却时间有搞好。
Just subtly referenced in there. It was said to be a way of having tradable, itemized Crucible tree experiences. Hilarious comment. Can you tell us anything more about what these are?
Right, so it's Crucible tree experience rather than experiences, which means you gain experience for the tree that you've got. So you consume the metaphor, and it levels up your item as though you've done encounters. And so it's worth noting, this is not meant to be the efficient way to level up items, right? It's certainly not the case that people are going to bypass the encounters and just go and trade for these and they never have to actually play. This is a really inefficient way of doing it, but it is possible. If you're currency rich and time poor and need to find a way to get that last bit of experience, then this is a way to do that. It's kind of like a Facetor's Lens being a single-use item that grants the experience, and I suspect that, you know, it's obviously going to be priced in the economy based on how useful it is, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be the primary way that you level these items up.
Right, gotcha. I mean, I feel like if there's a way of efficiently playing the game by not playing the game, someone will figure it out.
Yeah, it's dangerous for us to add, but we do like the idea of a limited amount of tradability here, and there's various ways to get it as well, which is interesting. Like there's sell nodes on the trees, as we call them, the ones that you can vend. You can vend the item to get some. There's mods on the endgame maps, and it helps a bit because when we were designing the endgame map, we didn't want the individual monsters you're fighting there to work towards leveling up a Crucible item when you're already expected to bring multiple Crucible items in with you in order to combine the trees together.
Right. those nodes that allow you to vendor items for different rewards. Why engage with the mechanic if you don't have an item that you actively want to forge right now? So how often do you find these nodes, and are they always substantial rewards, or are they some smaller ones as well, like a few Alks or a Kale Sword?
It's worth noting, we believe that people always will have items they want to forge, and the goal of these vendor nodes is to tempt them away from that. Like, at any stage, you could be working towards making the best item on the realm, but instead, oh, there's a Divine Orb if I just sink in a bunch of encounters into getting that. And so, it's a job well done of these nodes if you are sitting there getting, you know, currency rather than actually making the most broken items. Having said that, we suspect people will work out the value of the broken items and realize those are worth going for. In terms of how often you find them, they're mostly in the end game, and they're not too common. Like, you're not going to be sitting there with a stash full of them trying to, you know, just swim in currency, but at the same time, you'll probably have access if you need one and you don't have a thing you particularly want to focus on at the moment. It's just so encounters don't feel entirely wasted. There are also some cool little tricks and combos that we aren't going to delve into, but it's worth having a look at that. In terms of what types of currency, it's various currency, starting at mid-tier stuff. If you do find things like Chaos Orbs, they'll be in larger quantity, and you'll have to do the math of basically how much experience am I getting versus what the currency payoff is versus what other opportunities I have for my time at the moment, and you know it'll be straightforward to work out which ones you're wanting to do and which ones you're wanting to trade away.
On the maps side of thing, how rare are those like geodes that you can crack to get those maps, the like endgame content of this?
So there's two tiers, and it's worth noting the acquisition here is subtly different than the way we normally do these maps. Like, these are always rare, and they come through this stacked deck like currency item, which is the geode that you crack open, and because it comes through the currency item, your ability to find rare items doesn't affect the rate that you find these. Like, you're getting just currency essentially to get them, and then there's the unwrapping experience of seeing what the mods are on it. Now, the lower tier one is something you'll certainly play in maps often, right? Like, it's, you know, you're not finding it every map. Maybe you're not even finding it every 4 or 5 maps, but you are finding it pretty commonly. So you're getting a lot of access to combining trees together. The higher tier one, on the other hand, is harder to get because that lets you do some really interesting stuff. So that one is certainly pitched quite a lot rarer than the first one.
And you're being pretty coy on these maps and what they entail and what the higher version does now.
And this is for a few reasons, right? Like, first of all the rates I'm talking about here, like, they're changing in this last week. This last week is the point where we massage it from being this works and is cool into a fine machine that works perfectly with the right, you know, economic implications and so on. We're starting the alpha shortly, like, you know, in 10 minutes kind of thing. And that's going to give us really good feedback there. We've got a week of iteration now that everything is working and great, and so things will change. There will be more mods added, there'll be mods removed. And so if I go into too much detail of listing every mod, it's just going to be wrong a week from now when we've had time to really hone it.
Fair enough. Let's talk a bit about the challenge of this league. So, the longer you channel the Crucible Forge in a map encounter, the more dangerous it becomes. What makes the monsters dangerous here?
So, as you channel it, more monsters are spawned, and they combine into larger, more impactful monsters. So, higher tier monsters here, we've got an internal tiering system. The higher tier monsters are generally more likely to be magic, rare, or unique. And the longer you channel, the more damage and damage reduction every monster gets. Also, more difficult encounters are more rewarding. So generally speaking, play the hardest encounters you can. But it's worth noting, and this is an interesting question, everyone comes up with, is there a button I can click to bypass the channeling and just have the hardest difficulty encounter, right? Fair enough, no one likes having to wait a few seconds, but it's worth noting the hardest difficulty encounter will probably smear you to the wall. We want, and this may be wishful thinking because some Path of Exile players are very capable, but we're trying very hard to make it so that the highest difficulty encounters are significantly harder than League content that you may have accidentally run into in the past. Now, of course, you don't need to max it out like that. Maybe only do that if you have ridiculous twink items or something. We are also trying to signal this in the UI. This wasn't shown in the video, but we are having kind of like a temperature concept where the harder it's getting, the more you see the UI getting a bit angry at you. And so you know, I can generally handle about this amount of difficulty, and you've got an idea of where your character falls on the scale. You're certainly going to want to go as hard as you can, but our goal here when designing these risk versus reward leagues is to kill your character. We want to set it up so you overcommit and get nothing, because that way you'll learn your abilities and it's a little less gifty than if we just had every encounter succeedable.
It's like Metamorph all over again with players putting sticks in their own front tires and being like, oh no, why have I crashed? Oh. Cool.
Yes.
On that note then, what happens if you fail a Crucible encounter? Is there some risk-reward aspect here, just outside of dying?
You only get the Crucible tree experience if you complete the encounter, but your item is not at risk. We went moderately safe with that. So essentially, if you make an encounter that's too hard, you might lose experience on your main character, or lose your hardcore character or something if you die, but realistically, the only thing you're practically missing out on is finishing the encounter to get the experience.
I noticed on the Primeval Remnant map teaser, there was a mod, players cannot suppress spell damage. I know the intention is to make these maps very challenging, but how do you approach making monsters harder versus disabling aspects of builds or hampering the player when it comes to designing difficulty?
So the mods on the maps are meant to be very dangerous. Like, we picked mods here that are like Expedition Remnants almost. Like, we want something that's very challenging. But you get fewer of them than on a regular map because half of them are upsides. So 6 modded map here has 3 upsides, 3 downsides. And the downside ones, some of them will raise the difficulty of the monsters, usually by a bunch, and some of them will hamper your build's defenses or potentially make your build not work in the map. But it's worth noting that stuff like spell suppression is more of a hampering your defenses than saying you can't kill monsters. So certainly going into a no spell suppression map when you rely on it takes away one of your defensive attributes, like be careful about that, but it's not necessarily completely breaking it for you. You're going to have to make decisions about which to play. And we strongly prefer that way of designing it. If we have to make it so that every map is playable on every character without really imposing any difficulty, then it just becomes a bit of mush. And so, in this case, you will occasionally open a geode, look forward to doing the map, and realize it's better for your friend to do it, and maybe you'll trade with one that you can do. And if you're playing an SSF and don't have the ability to trade, then you just have to make decisions about whether you run it or don't run it as the other option, or run it carefully, or make another character and play that character in that map to get value from it, and so on and so on.
Alright. I always have to ask, party play, how does it work in Crucible?
So it fully works in a party, everyone gets experience. Basically, you must channel an item at the encounter at least a little bit to be rewarded for it. So there's the molten circle, as you've seen, and basically the players step inside and you choose an item and channel it. And all the channeling makes the encounter harder and more rewarding and so on. And as long as you've contributed at least a second of channeling or whatever, you're going to be taking part in it. Once anyone who is channeled steps outside of the molten ring, a countdown starts which will trigger the encounter. And it's worth noting that throughout maps, that means you can fully engage these without any problem or loss. Like, sure, maybe, you know, some annoying party member will make the encounter way too hard for everyone, but they have the ability to do that elsewhere in the game too. In endgame maps, each map only allows the map owner to use its crafting benches. So 1 geode equals 1 map equals 1 craft. You can bring your friends, they can get stuff from it, but they can't use that craft unless they contributed the map.
Some more questions from chat. How does item level and map tier affect Crucible? Can I quarry farm item level 86 weapons, they ask?
Alright.
Low-level areas have way less Crucible experience.
So low-level areas give quite a lot less Crucible experience. There's an exponential curve on that to encourage you. Like, you know, if you're playing somewhere 10 levels under you, you're certainly going to have a much better time just doing it in the maps that you're playing. Any other aspects that are worth mentioning?
Item level affects how much experience it applies to level up.
That's true. So the item level does affect experience costs for hitting certain skills. And of course, I believe that certain skills are gated behind certain levels as well, right? You really do want to be playing higher level stuff. Like, maybe there's some niche place where you can get access to a certain skill and it's too expensive to get it and you can quarry farm more efficiently, but you're kind of wasting your time doing that compared to just playing the maps that... In an old version of Path of Exile, where map scarcity was more of a thing, like in, say, Ruthless, where it's actually hard to play maps because it economically destroys you to play too many, then fair enough, quarry farming might be a more reasonable strategy. But I think that in contemporary mainline Path of Exile, you're wasting your time if you're spending too long in the quarry here.
Now, the mobs that you spawn with the channeling of the Crucible, are these different to normal mobs, or are they enhanced versions of regular mobs? And either way, are they something that you can turn into a Spectre, for example? Summoner players were saying.
So a few questions there. So they are actually themed around the properties of the item, which is interesting. Like, there's a light relation between what you've got on the item you're channeling. This is some subtlety here, but they are special, and in general for these leagues we try to draw monsters from the pool that are in the area, or at least, you know, the models of those monsters, just for memory reasons and so on. Is there anything else that's special about these monsters here, aside from the fact that they're quite a lot harder if you make the encounter hard?
Yeah, they have new skills. And they are...
Yeah, so all spectrable, all have new skills. There is essentially a separate set of Crucible monsters.
None of that is what I expected.
I actually personally underestimated how important new monsters are for league design. Like, we've done a lot of these leagues, like 38 or 39, and if you sat me in a room alone without any other devs and got me to list what goes into a league, I'd forget new monsters. But a lot of people here realize it's critical to have it so the texture of the moment-to-moment combat with monsters does feel different than the rest of the game in a league, and so that's been quite interesting. As something that it honestly took me a lot of years of development of Path of Exile before I realized how important that was.
You said the modifiers on the item affect what monsters spawn. That's such a clever nuance.
Tree modifiers, like
okay,
the tree that you're leveling up. Cool. You'll see what we mean. It's not a big deal. It's just cute.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like, that's really cute. Like, it's a cute detail, a nuance that I wouldn't have expected. Neat.
I know we're rushed to make these expansions in the cycle time we have, but we do get time to finesse the details. And interestingly, this cycle has been 17 weeks, so we've had a few extra weeks to get it right. And yeah, I mean, I don't mean to prematurely curse anything, but we're actually looking at a pretty good place quality-wise. Like, the number of issues we have open in our tracker and the stress on the team is significantly lower than it has been at various points. Like, I think yesterday, when we were at the point where we would in the past have had 250 open issues, we're at like 87 by my count. And so, I'm not seeing overtime being done outside of a little bit of preparation for the live stream the last few evenings. And so that's looking pretty good. I think that, like the Incursion launch, we're going to be hitting it with like a bit of time to spare and make sure everything's good.
That's excellent to hear. And details like that, nuances like that as well. I think they really add to the flavor of it. This weapon that you've been working on for a while is going to feel different to craft than a different weapon in a subtle way that you might not even put your finger on. And that's quite cool. So let's move on to a League revamps topic now. So the Breach revamp, I feel, is actually a really clever way of dealing with the issue of old content bloat, or of the game being too overwhelming for new players. Revamp older content, shift it up to a higher level where it's discovered later and less likely to overwhelm those newer players. Now, was this the intention here, or just a happy side effect?
It's a happy side effect, but one that we definitely acknowledge. So the basic way that the Breach revamp happened was we started by saying, man, there are a lot of splinters in Breach, and it feels crap to click on every splinter, and they kind of are worthless because you're working towards a Breach stone when you pick up a bunch of them, and that Breach stone is going to be lower level than you are right now. Like, you're not going to care about that Breach stone. You're going to want to upgrade it multiple times before you can run it. So how do we fix this? We thought, wouldn't it be cool if splinters were rarer, so they're impactful and there's less clicks, and they actually led to something immediately good? And so we realized, oh look, let's take Breach stones and just bump them up a bunch of levels and basically make Breach stones themselves valuable, because in their current form it's based around an old version of Path of Exile. And then we realized we can just remove 3 tiers of Breach stones in this case, and we just cascaded the chain of tidy-ups from there until eventually Breach is pitched at way more impactful, tighter than before.
网路太慢吧。What the? 效能问题吗？2500。